Picture a chessboard in Paris in 1858. In 17 moves, one of these two players is checkmated, and the player giving the checkmate has less on the board than the player receiving it. Not a pawn less, not a rook less. When the mate arrives, the losing side still has a queen and a knight that the winning side does not. A word about what's true here and what isn't. The moves are exactly the moves that were played. They come straight from the game's own record. The stories around them are softer. Some of it is well documented, some is legend, retold and reshaped for 100 years. Where it's legend, I'll say so. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love reading them. London at midnight, Manila at breakfast, all of us in different hours watching the same pieces move. Wind the years back now, back past that board, past that quiet Paris room. Go south and go earlier to a warmer city by a wide brown river. New Orleans. Iron balconies, wet, heavy air, French spoken in the street and older tongues underneath it. Here, on the 22nd of June, 1837, a boy is born. Paul Morphy. A Creole family, old and settled and comfortable. Money enough and books enough, and the kind of house where the afternoons are long. His father was a man of the law named Alonzo Michael Morphy. A lawyer first, then a member of the Louisiana legislature, then the state's attorney general, and in the end, a justice of the Louisiana Supreme Court. So this was a serious house, run by a serious man. A house where a thing done well was noticed, and a thing done carelessly was noticed too. And in this house, among the other quiet habits, there was chess. Not a lesson, not a discipline, just something the grown men did. The family had its own small circle of players. The strongest among them was Paul's uncle, Ernest Morphy, and a friend of the family, Eugene Rousseau, who could hold his own against anyone in the city. How he learned is softer ground than that he learned. The one thing every account agrees on is that he was in the room. So the boy grew up with a board always somewhere in the room. Pieces being set out, pieces being put away, two men bent over a game after supper. And he learned it the way a child learns a language spoken all around him. Young, at home, without anyone quite deciding to teach him. Now, there is a lovely version of this that the family liked to tell. That no one ever taught the boy at all. That he simply watched and understood. The story goes that two of the men finished a game and agreed it was a draw. And the little boy, who had never been shown a single rule, spoke up and showed them how one side could have won. It is a beautiful story, and it is a story. Remember the promise made at the start of all this. The moves in these games are the record. The tales around them may be legend. This is one of the legends. And the best reason to doubt it is Morphy himself. A companion who knew him well wrote down that Morphy, hearing a tale of just this kind, waved it away. He called it a humbug and an impossibility. The boy in the story grew into a man who did not believe the story. What is true and quieter is only this. He learned early, and he learned at home, and by a very young age he was already frightening to play. There is a second tale, and it is a grander one. Around 1846, a famous soldier passed through New Orleans. General Winfield Scott, a tall, vain, formidable man, and a proud chess player. He asked for a game against a worthy local opponent, and they brought him a small boy of 9, The general, so the story runs, was insulted. Then he sat down. Then he lost. Again, hold this one gently. The biographies do report it, but it rests on family memory, not on anything written down at the time. So let it be what it is, a thing the books repeat and cannot quite prove. And notice how it reaches us. Not from a newspaper of the day, not from a score sheet, from the family, remembering, long afterward. That is the same road the first story travelled. Two good tales, one source, and the source loved him. But now we come to something firmer, something that really happened and was really recorded. The year is 1850. Paul Morphy is 12 years old. 12, and not yet 13, his birthday would not come until that June. And a real master comes to town. Johann Lowenthal, a Hungarian, a strong and travelled player, a grown professional of the game. He was shown to the boy the way a champion is shown to a curiosity. Sit with a promising child. Be gracious. Move on. That is not how it went. The 12-year-old beat him. Not by a trick, not by a swindle in a wild position. The child simply understood the board more clearly than the master did. There is a story told about Lowenthal's face during those games. That each time the boy found the right move, the master's eyebrows would climb. That too is the kind of detail a story polishes, but the result is not in doubt. How many games they played, though, the record cannot fully agree on. The careful modern biography settled on 3, correcting an older count of 2. A later collection also prints 3, but 2 of them are nearly the same game twice. So we will say only what is safe to say. They played several games. The boy came out ahead. What is not in doubt is that the games were written down. They survive. You could sit down tonight and play through them. That is the difference between the general and the master. One of them is a story about a board. The other one is a board. Think about that for a moment. A traveller who had faced grown champions across Europe, undone by a child from Louisiana. And the child went home and did his lessons and grew up like anyone else. Because that was the other thing about Paul Morphy. Chess was never meant to be the whole of him. He was clever at everything, and he was raised for the law like his father. In 1854, he graduated from Spring Hill College. 4 years after the master came to town, he was still in a classroom, doing what the son of that house was expected to do. The chess had not been given anything. It had been fitted in around everything else. A serious student of a serious family on a serious path. The chess was a gift he happened to carry. Not, as far as anyone planned, a life. And yet within a few short years, that gift would carry him across an ocean. To the finest players in the world, to a private box above an opera. And then, almost as suddenly, away from all of it. So there are questions to sit with here, in the dark. How does a comfortable boy in New Orleans become the strongest chess player alive? What happens to a man who conquers a game so completely, and then simply stops? And why, when the whole story is told, do so few people remember how it ends? We will follow all of it, move by move and year by year. But it begins the way he began, at the board. So close your eyes now, and let the 64 squares settle into place in the dark, and let the pieces take their stand. By the spring of 1857, the boy we have been following was very nearly a man with a profession. On the 7th of April, 1857, he took his law degree from the University of Louisiana. He had read the books, He had passed his examinations. The law was his. But the law was not quite ready to have him. He was still short of the age a man had to reach before he could stand up in a courtroom and practice. And so, without asking for it, he was handed a strange and lovely thing. A year, a whole free year. The profession he had trained for would keep. It would still be there when the year was gone. Fully qualified and told, in effect, to come back when he was older. Another young man might have paced the floor at that. For him, it did something quieter. It cleared his calendar completely. No clients, no cases, no hours to keep for anyone but himself. Because there was one thing he could do better than nearly anyone then alive. And that autumn, an invitation to do it arrived from the north. In New York, for the first time, the players of the whole country would gather. For the first time, there would be a way to ask who was truly best, and to answer it over the board. The first American Chess Congress. It opened on the 6th of October, 1857, and ran on toward the 10th of November. 5 weeks, a whole autumn handed over to one hall and one question. The man who had made it happen was Daniel Willard Fisk. He kept the book of it as well. Every game, every score, set down and printed, which is why we can still check what happened in that hall. He had gathered 16 of the strongest players in the land into a single hall. 16 invited. In the end, only one of them could stand above the rest. There was a prize on the table too, $300 to the winner. A real sum in that year, enough to change a professional's life, and nothing at all to a Morphy of New Orleans. The shape of it was plain, and it was unforgiving. A knockout. Win your match and go on. Lose it and go home. And a draw counted for nothing at all. A drawn game settled no question, it simply had to be played again until someone won. There was no shelter in a half point. You won or you were finished. 16 men went into that hall. 15 of them were going to go home beaten. Into that hall came the young man up from New Orleans with his unasked-for year in his pocket. His first match was against a player named Thompson. Thompson was beaten. Then came Meek. Meek was beaten as well. 3 games to nothing against Thompson. 3 games to nothing against Meek. Not close matches that turned at the end. Clean sweeps, both of them. Match by match, the room began to notice the quiet one who did not seem to lose. In the semi-final stood a player named Lichtenhein. And Lichtenhein was set aside, like the 2 who had come before him. 3 wins there, and 1 drawn game, and a draw counted for nothing, so it simply had to be played over. 3 matches, 3 of the country's best men, the same ending each time. By now, something had become plain to everyone in the room. The finest players America could put in a chair had sat down across from him, one after another. And one after another, they had got up beaten. The young man from the South was now, by any honest reckoning, the strongest player in his country. Prodigy had become the fact. There was only one match left in the whole tournament. The final. And waiting across the board for it was Louis Paulson. Paulson had won his own way up through the field to reach this same table. 2 men left out of the 16 who had begun. One of them the young lawyer with a year to spend, the other Paulson. There is a story that has trailed after this final ever since. That over a single move, Paulson fell into thought for 11 hours. And here the honest thing is to tell you that the sources do not agree. One popular retelling holds that it was 11 hours poured into one move. The tournament's own book and a careful biography say something different. They say the 11 hours were Paulson's time spread across the whole game, while Morphy used only about 25 minutes on his longest thinks. Which of those is true, you may hold in your mind and weigh for yourself. But all of that still lay ahead of him. The 11 hours, however they were spent, had not yet been spent. Not a single move of this last game had yet been made. The other tables were emptying. The other matches were done. The hall was narrowing down to one board and two chairs. Lamps low, voices down, the long tournament come to its final evening. 1 year, freely given, one tournament, nearly run, one man still to pass. The room seemed to hold its breath for a game not yet begun. And the young man from New Orleans drew out his chair. He settled himself before the pieces. And he sat down to play the final. And in New York that autumn, in a room full of the country's strongest players, the pieces are set out for the first time. White opens by pushing the king's pawn to e4. One square, then another, out into the middle of the board. It claims the center, and it opens two doors at once, a lane for the bishop, a lane for the queen. Black answers in the mirror. The pawn goes to e5. Face to face now, the two center pawns, neither able to take the other. They lock eyes across one empty square and hold. White brings the knight from g1 to f3. It leans on the pawn sitting at e5, the first small pressure of the game. Black defends by hand, quietly. The knight comes from b8 to c6. Now the e5 pawn is guarded, and the two knights watch the center between them. White develops the second knight from b1 to c3. This is the four knights, an old honest opening, where both sides simply bring the horses out and see who blinks. There was a sharper road here, and it is the one the modern books take. Instead of the second knight, the bishop straight out to b5, leaning at once on the horse that guards e5. Black follows the pattern. The knight steps from g8 to f6. And there they are. Four knights on the board, two apiece, each one eyeing the enemy center. It looks symmetrical. It looks safe. Balance rarely lasts. White reaches for the bishop and slides it from f1 all the way to b5. It pins nothing yet, but it points at the knight on c6, the very piece guarding e5. This is the old idea, lean on the defender, and the pawn behind it starts to feel alone. Black could copy the move again. Instead, Black chooses a sharper path. The dark bishop comes out from f8 to c5. It aims down the diagonal toward f2, the soft square in front of the white king. The symmetry is broken. White pressures a knight. Black points a bishop at the king's doorstep. Now White tucks the king away. Castling kingside, the king to g1, the rook to f1. The king slips into the corner behind its pawns, and the rook slides in beside it. Safety first, and a rook quietly awakened on the f-file. Though the pawn on e5 was already there for the taking. The knight could have captured it this very move. And if the black knight took back, a pawn to d4 would hit the bishop on c5 and the knight on e5 in the same breath and win the piece straight back. Black castles in return, the king to g8, the rook to f8. Both kings are home now, both nestled on the kingside, a wall of 3 pawns in front of each. Picture it for a moment. 2 castled kings in their corners, facing each other across a still, even board. Knights and bishops out, rooks connected, the center pawn still locked at e4 and e5. Nothing is broken, and into that calm, White strikes. The knight leaps from f3 and captures the pawn on e5. It snatches the center pawn, and for a heartbeat it seems white has simply won a pawn for nothing. But look why it was possible. The bishop on b5 ties down the knight on c6. If black grabs the knight back, that bishop takes on c6, and the trade comes out even. So the pawn was, for now, only borrowed. Black does not rush to take it. Instead, the rook lifts from f8 to e8. Down the open e-file it stares, right at the intruding knight on e5. This is the black way in this line, not to grab, but to point every piece at the center and ask hard questions. The knight on e5 is attacked and cannot simply sit there. White must choose where it goes. White decides to cash in. The knight takes on c6, capturing the black knight. It removes a defender and hands black a small blemish to carry in the pawns. A colder, modern eye keeps the knight instead, back to f3, holding the extra pawn, and asking black to prove there is anything for it. Black recaptures, the d-pawn takes towards c6, from d7 onto c6. Now black has double pawns on the c-file, c7 and c6, one standing behind the other. A small structural wound, but in return, the d-file has been thrown wide open. And notice what recapturing this way did. It freed the light bishop on c8 and opened a road for the queen. And the wound has a sting in it. The pawn that lands on c6 attacks the bishop on b5 the instant it arrives, so white's very next move is spent moving a piece that had already moved. This is Morphy's bargain, made 100 times over. Give me open lines and keep your tidy pawns. White pulls the bishop back from b5 to c4. Off the emptying queenside onto the long diagonal, aiming again toward f7 near the black king. It is a natural retreat. The bishop had done its pinning work, now it eyes the other wing. Natural and half a move slow. The square the bishop actually wants is e2, and from b5 it could have gone straight there. Black answers on the edge. The b-pawn advances 2 squares to b5. It jabs at the bishop, shooing it away, and grabs a little space out on the queenside. It is tempting, and it looks active, but a colder, modern eye marks it as slightly loose. The cleaner path, it is now seen, was the knight to g4, springing forward, eyeing f2 and h2, keeping the pressure hot. Instead, the pawn move spends a tempo pushing wood on the flank and lets white untangle a fraction more comfortably. A small thing. In a game remembered for one enormous thing, even Morphy's little slips are worth noticing. White slides the bishop back again, from c4 home to e2. Modest, unglamorous, exactly right. It sidesteps the pawn and settles on a quiet square. b5, then c4, then e2. 3 squares in 2 moves to reach the one a single move would have reached. From e2, the bishop guards, waits, keeps out of trouble. White is playing to hold that extra pawn. See the shape of it. White wants to survive the storm and be a pawn up in the calm afterward. Black wants the calm never to come. And now black strikes in the center. The knight on f6 captures the pawn on e4. It seizes white's proud center pawn and stands in the heart of the board, full of menace. The rook on e8 is right behind it, so the knight is backed by heavy support down the file. For a moment the material is level again, the borrowed pawn quietly repaid. But this is not really about a pawn. The knight on e4 is a splinter driven into white's position. White must pull it out. The knight on c3 captures on e4. It takes the bold intruder cleanly, and for an instant the center looks swept and safe. But look down that line. A white knight now sits on e4, and behind it, on the same open file, waits the black rook on e8. The knight stands in front of its own king's shelter, and every black piece is beginning to lean toward the same corner. Black barely pauses. The rook on e8 lifts, glides down the open file, and takes the knight on e4. That was the horse standing guard in front of white's castled king, and now it is simply gone. For this one breath, black is a whole piece ahead. But a piece taken so deep in enemy ground is a piece that can be chased. The rook sits on e4, out in the open, in the middle of the board. And white has a way to charge a little of that back in time. The light bishop steps from e2 to f3. It touches the rook on e4 and asks it, quietly, to move along. The same bishop now looks down the long pale diagonal toward black's queenside and the c6 pawn. So black has won the knight, but must spend a move tucking the rook out of danger. The rook slides back just 2 squares to e6. It stays on the open file, still looking up the board toward white's king. And from e6 it can travel sideways along the 6th rank if a target ever opens on the other wing. Hold on to that rook on e6. It is closer to white's king than it looks. White plays a small, careful pawn move, c2 to c3. It builds a low wall on the dark squares and readies a push of the b-pawn to drive the bishop off c5. The braver move was in the middle, a pawn to d4, thrown out where the black queen could take it. If she does, the dark bishop steps to e3 to hit her, and the queens come off the board. A trade of queens is the one thing an attacking player cannot bear. White let that chance go by. Nothing dramatic, a hand tidying the queenside before the weather turns. Now the black queen comes. He leaves d8 and plunges all the way to d3, deep inside white's half of the board. Look at what she touches from there. Along the 3rd rank, she stares straight across at the bishop on f3. Along the short diagonal, she eyes the rook sitting on f1. She sits on white's doorstep, and white cannot easily shoo her away. Modern analysis calls this the finest move in the position. The queen has become a splinter white cannot pull out. And look at why she is allowed to stand there. No white pawn attacks d3, and no white pawn ever can again. The c-pawn has just gone to c3, where it guards b4 and d4 instead. The e-pawn was taken off the board 3 moves ago. Both of the pawns that could have shooed the queen away are either gone or standing 1 square wide. White pushes the b-pawn to b4. It jabs at the bishop on c5, telling it to find a new home. White would love to win a little time out here while black's pieces crowd the far wing. The defense lay on the other side of the board entirely. The rook from f1 across to e1. Offer a trade on the open file. Every rook that comes off is 1 fewer black piece aimed at the king. The dark bishop slides back to b6. It keeps its aim along the diagonal that points at f2, the tender square beside white's king. 2 black pieces now lean toward that corner, the queen on d3, the bishop on b6. White tries the a-pawn, a 2 to a4. It strikes at the pawn on b5, hoping to crack the queenside open and find some counterplay. Black takes. The b5 pawn captures on a4. This is the accurate reply. Black opens the lines on its own terms, not white's. White's queen swings out and recaptures on a4. She grabs the pawn, but look where she has gone, far out to the edge of the queenside. Her own king is on the opposite side of the board, and now she is a long journey from home. There was a way to do this without her. The pawn on b4 could have gone on to b5, striking at c6 and leaving the queen at home. Black develops the last sleeping piece. The light bishop steps from c8 to d7. It shields the c6 pawn and clears the back rank so the two rooks can speak to each other. Yet a colder, modern eye would have sent this bishop to b7 instead. From b7 it would have joined that long pale diagonal, a second gaze fixed on the squares by White's king. On d7 the bishop is useful, but it points the wrong way, away from the fire. White lifts the rook from a1 to a2. The idea is to slide it along the second rank later, to guard the king from the side. But this too is a half step short. Stronger was to hurry the queen straight back to a6, rushing her toward the defense. The rook on a2 is slow, and against what is coming, a single slow move is enough to lose. Black brings the last rook into the line, 8 to e8. Now both black rooks stand on the open e-file, one behind the other, a stacked column of force. The front rook on e6, the back rook on e8, aimed like a single spear up the board. See the whole board for a moment. White's king sits on g1, behind 3 pawns on f2, g2 and h2, but the knight that guarded it is long gone. White's queen is away on a6's neighbour, out on f4. One rook just shuffled to a2, the other still on f1, the dark bishop asleep on c1. Black's king rests quietly on g8, and the queen is the splinter on d3. The bishop on b6 and both rooks on the e-file all lean toward White's king. 4 black pieces pointed at one corner, and White's defenders scattered to the far wing. White finally sends the queen to a6. From there she touches the c6 pawn and the a7 pawn, hoping to make some threat of her own. But it is a move too late. The battle has already moved past her. The move that might still have held was the humblest one available, the queen all the way back to d1. From d1 she would stand beside her own king, and from d1 she would guard f3. And now the quiet thunderclap. The black queen leaves d3 and takes the bishop on f3. The queen, for a bishop, the strongest piece on the board, handed over on purpose. Why give her up? Look at the only piece that can take her back. The single guardian of f3 is the g2 pawn, standing right beside White's king. If that pawn captures the queen, it steps off the g-file, and the g-file swings wide open. And a black rook is already one move from that very file. And the pawn on g2 is holding down 2 jobs, not one. It is the only guard of f3, and it is also the only white unit watching h3. So when it steps sideways to take the queen, it does more than tear the g-file open. It leaves h3 unwatched, and black's other bishop is 2 moves away from settling on exactly that square. That is the whole idea. The queen dies to tear the last wall away from the king. White has little real choice. The g2 pawn takes the queen on f3. The bishop is avenged, the queen is captured, and, on paper, White is now far, far ahead in material. But the pawn that shielded the king has vanished from g2. The king on g1 now sits behind a broken fence, the g-file yawning open above his head. The rook pours in. It swings from e6 to g6, and it is check. Straight down the open g-file, the rook glares at the white king. Nothing stands between them but the empty square where a pawn used to be. This is what the queen bought, this one file, thrown open for this one rook. White's king has only one way to move. He shuffles into the corner g1 to h1, hiding behind the h2 pawn. But the corner is a small, small room. And a second black rook is still waiting, patient, back on e8. See it as it stands now. The white king pressed into h1, the h2 pawn his last thin cover. The black rook on g6 leans down over him. The black rook on e8 waits to follow it in. The bishop on b6 still rakes the long dark diagonal toward the king's corner. White owns a queen and more, stranded out on a6, and none of it can reach home in time. Everything black owns is already here, gathered around this one corner. One rook gives the check, another waits its turn, and the net begins to draw tight around h1. Black takes the light bishop from d7 and draws it the whole length of the board to h3. It comes to rest just beside the white king's corner, staring down the pale diagonal toward h1. The threat is quiet and immediate. The bishop wants g2, where it would check the king and strike the rook on f, one in the same breath. And the dark bishop on b6 is already trained on g1 from the far side. The two of them mean to catch the king between them. Modern analysis calls this the truest move on the board. White answers by sliding the rook from f1 across to d1. The idea is to save that rook from the coming fork and to lend a hand toward the open d file. But a colder, modern eye prefers the queen dropping back to d3 to rush home and stand by the king. With the queen guarding, the storm around h1 could still have been weathered. Instead, the rook has gone to d1, and the king is left to face the bishops nearly alone. Black plays the bishop from h3 to g2, check. From g2, it lies right against the king on h1, a single square away along the diagonal. The white king has only one door, and it must take it. The king steps across to g1. Now feel what the bishop on g2 is really standing on. It sits on the g file, and far up that same file, on g6, a black rook is waiting. The bishop slides off g2 and captures the pawn on f3, and with it, check. As the bishop leaves the g file, that file swings open, and the rook on g6 looks straight down at the king. This is the discovered check. The piece that moves is not the piece that gives the check. So the bishop steals a pawn on f3 and unmasks the rook in one motion, and the king must answer the rook, not the thief. The king cannot stay on the g-file, so it steps aside to f1. The rook on g6 lowers its aim. For a moment, the king breathes. But the bishop returns, from f3 back to g2, check once more. From g2 it again touches the king, now on f1 along the short diagonal. This is the rhythm black is grinding out, check, step, check, each turn peeling the king farther from cover. Back the king goes from f1 to g1. The bishop on g2 stands between the rook and the king, so on g1 there is a thin breath of shelter. And black lifts the bishop again, from g2 up to h3, check. The g-file tiers open a second time, the rook on g6 pours down it, and the king is in check anew. The same machine worked twice. Bishop steps off, rook strikes through. And count what white has actually been allowed to choose through all of this. The rook check on g6, the bishop check on g2, the discovered check on f3, the next one on g2, and this one on h3, 5 times running. The white king has exactly one legal move on the entire board. The king climbs back into its corner, to h1. See the whole board as it stands. The white king is pinned in the h1 corner, its pawns on f2 and h2, the only crumbs of cover. The light bishop hovers on h3, the dark bishop still waits on b6, aimed down the long diagonal at f2 and g1. Black's rooks sit on g6 and e8, the white rooks have drifted to a2 and d1, far from the fire. And white's queen is still stranded on a6, a whole board away from the king that needs her. Now the dark bishop comes to life. From b6, it plunges in and captures the pawn on f2. It strips away half of the king's last cover and glares at g1 from close range. Here, a colder modern eye sees something faster, the light bishop back to g2 with check. That check would have driven the king out and drawn the net tighter, a shade quicker than this capture. But f2 falls, and the threats gather all the same. At last the white queen wakes. She races the whole diagonal home, from a6 all the way back to f1. She throws herself between the bishop on h3 and the bare king, blocking the pale diagonal at last. It is the only move that keeps the position standing for another breath. And notice, it is an offer of the queen herself, laid down squarely in the bishop's path. Black accepts without a flicker. The bishop on h3 takes the queen on f1. The strongest piece on the board comes off for a bishop, and black is glad of the trade. She crossed the whole board only to be spent on the king's doorstep, and now the king's last great defender is gone. The rook on d1 slides over and takes the bishop back on f1. The pieces have traded down, and what is left leans hard toward the attacker. The white king still cowers on h1, guarded now only by a rook on f1 and the pawn on h2. Black brings up fresh force. The rook from e8 drops down to e2. It slides onto the second rank, deep in white's camp, right along the row the king lives on. From e2 it rakes sideways toward the pawn on h2 and the king beyond it. White shuffles the other rook from a2 to a1, tucking it back onto the first rank. It slips off the second rank before the black rook can pin it there. But it is a step of retreat, not of rescue. The king's corner is no less lonely. Now the second black rook swings across from g6 to h6. It leaves the g file and takes up the h file, the very file the king sits upon. Down that file lies the pawn on h2, and behind it, the king on h1. There is nothing now to stop the rooks doubling toward h2. That one pawn is the last thin wall. Two rooks and a bishop all lean toward one trembling corner. Hold the picture a moment. White's king is jammed on h1. Its rooks sit on a1 and f1. Its bishop asleep on c1. Its pawns stand on b4, c3, d2 and h2, and not one of them can help. Black's rook on e2 sits on the king's own rank. The rook on h6 bears down the king's own file. The dark bishop broods on f2, the whole attack coiled and waiting to strike. White pushes the pawn from d2 to d4. It opens a lane so the sleeping bishop on c1 might finally see daylight. It is a search for one defender, any defender, to reach the king in time. The one practical try was to run. The king out to g2, off the corner, and off the file the rook is aiming down. It would not have saved the game. White is 2 pawns down, with nothing left but 2 rooks and a bishop apiece, and every black piece is already where it wants to be. But it does nothing for the corner where the danger actually lies. Black answers with a quiet, deadly step. The dark bishop slides from f2 to e3. It settles onto e3, planted firmly on the long, dark diagonal. From e3 it shields the rook on e2 and keeps its own gaze fixed on g1. And it clamps down on the pawn just pushed to d4, so the c1 bishop can never breathe through it. Every black piece now points at the white king, and white has nothing that points back. So the board rests here, the white king sealed into its corner on h1. Black's rook on e2, its rook on h6, and its bishop on e3 ring the king with no answer in sight. The white pieces stand scattered and idle, and the attack is already decided. And that is the last move anybody writes down. There is no checkmate on this board. The position is reached and looked at, and the record stops there. Underneath the moves, the result is written: a win for black. He was 20 years old, and there was nobody left in the country who could give him a game. Everyone else was on the other side of an ocean. And so the young man from New Orleans had run out of opponents. In New York, that autumn, there was no one left who could stand against him. He had come to the Congress a stranger and left it the finest player in his country. But America was a small pond for a talent this size. The real chess, the old chess, the deep water, that was across the ocean. So in 1858, he booked passage for Europe. He was still a very young man. That June, he turned 21, which means he had been only 20 at the Congress when he swept the board of the whole nation. And he would be 21 for most of the year that waited for him abroad. Picture the crossing. Weeks of grey Atlantic, the ship rising and falling, the coast of home long gone behind him. A slight, quiet young man, courteous to everyone, giving almost nothing away. He was sailing toward the greatest triumph of his life. And toward the one episode that later writers would flatten into a villain's story. It has a name, that episode, and the name is Howard Staunton. Staunton was the leading English player, and had been for years. More than a player, an authority. He edited a famous chess column. He had helped organize the Great London Tournament. His was the name a set of pieces still carries today. If you wanted to be called the best in the world, you went through Staunton. So Morphy did the natural thing. He challenged him to a match. A long match, over the board, the two of them, to settle the question plainly. And here is the fact at the center of everything that followed. The match never took place. They never sat down against each other, not one game. Now, the easy story, the one told for 100 years, is a simple one. The old champion, afraid of the young genius, hiding behind excuses. It is a satisfying story. It is the shape a legend likes. And it may not be fair. Because when you look closely, the reasons the match failed are genuinely tangled. Let me give you two solid facts before I give you the doubt they earn. The first is about Staunton himself. By this time, he had largely set competitive chess aside. His great work now was books, and one book above all. He was preparing a full edition of Shakespeare. And this was not something he could put down on a whim. It was a real publishing contract with real obligations. A contract carrying penalty clauses, money he stood to lose if the pages came late. That is not a chess player's excuse. It is a printer's schedule, and it was found by people going back through the papers a very long time afterward. A man cannot train for months against the strongest player alive and meet a printer's schedule at the same time. That is not the whole story, but it is not nothing either. The second fact is stranger, and it cuts the other way. The obstacle was not only on Staunton's side, it was on Morphy's. A match like this would be played for stakes, a large sum of money laid down on each side. And Morphy's own family did not want him playing for money. To them, a gentleman played for honor. A wager was beneath the family name. So they worked, quietly, to keep the money match from happening at all. By one account from someone close to him, they were ready to send an agent across the ocean, to stop such a match by every means they could. Sit with that a moment. The obstacle Staunton kept naming, the money, was being quietly pulled away by Morphy's own household. So the young man challenging the world was being reined in from behind by his own people. His stake money, the sum that would let the match be arranged, was slow to come. It came in the end from his own city. The chess club of New Orleans put up £500. It did not arrive until July of 1858. By then the letters had gone cold, and the window a match like that needs had already closed. And by July, it was already too late. So hold those two facts together. A man on one side with a printer at his back and a contract he could be fined for breaking. A young man on the other whose family was pulling the money out from under the whole affair. That is a harder, sadder, more human picture than a coward hiding from a hero. And here is where honesty has to do its work. The plain truth is that the sources genuinely disagree about this, and they disagree sharply. Careful modern research, going back to the letters and the records, tends to give Staunton the benefit of the doubt, a real difficulty over the stakes, not simple cowardice. And yet popular retellings, some written as recently as 2024, still tell it the old way, the villain ducking the challenge. I am not going to settle it for you, because it is not settled. The match did not happen, that much is certain. Why it did not happen is the part that honest people still argue over. What we can say is this. There were hard feelings. Letters passed back and forth in the chess columns, growing cooler and sharper. A challenge accepted in vague terms, then postponed, then quietly allowed to die. And a young man left standing in England, ready to play, with no one across the table. It must have stung. He had crossed an ocean for exactly this, and the one match he wanted most slipped through his fingers. But he was not a man who complained loudly. He simply looked to where the game was still waiting for him. And that was not London. It was Paris. Across the channel there were masters who would sit down against him without excuses. The famous café where the great players had gathered for 100 years. A city that loved chess and would very soon love him. So he turned away from the match that never was. He gathered his things and set his face toward France. And the young man from New Orleans went to Paris. Paris made his name, and it made it in 2 rooms. The first was a café, the Café de la Régence, the chess room of the city, where the strongest players in France kept their tables. There he played Blindfold. One account that has come down to us has him facing 8 of the best players in Paris at once, without sight of a single board. He sat turned away from all of it, holding every game in his head at the same time. 10 hours, that account says it lasted. But the same account keeps no date. It names none of the 8. It gives no score. So those are not ours to hand you. We only have that it happened. Except that one of the 8 does have a name. The sculptor Eugène Lecain, who afterward made a marble bust of Morphy's head. And the following April, the old French master Saint-Amand crowned that bust with Laurel. That is the café. Now the other room. The second room was a box at the opera. The Théâtre Italien. He was invited up into a private box above the floor by the exiled Duke of Brunswick, Charles, a reigning duke living out his exile in Paris, and by a count who was the duke's companion that night. And there, while the performance went on below them, Morphy sat down to play. And here the record begins to argue with itself. Which night it was, no one has settled. One researcher narrows it to Norma, the 21st, the 23rd, the 26th, or the 30th of October, 1858. Or more likely, he thought, the Barber of Seville on the 4th of November. The standard biography puts it on the 2nd of November. And Morphy's own companion, writing the very next year, said the opera was Norma. Still others have named different works entirely. The most careful modern conclusion is the plain one, that we cannot say. So we will only say, that autumn. The Count is just as slippery. His name comes down to us spelled more than one way, Isouard and Isolde de Vauvenargues. One researcher argues for Comte Isolde de Vauvenargues, the sound of it landing as Isouard. Another concludes the correct spelling has simply never been established. And where he was from, we are only guessing, from his name and the room he sat in. It is nowhere written down. This is the thinnest part of the whole story. A single witness to the café, a disputed evening at the opera. Beyond that, there is no more. And rather than fill the gap with something invented, we let it stay empty. But the evening itself is not in doubt. Two noble men on one side, sharing the white pieces between them, deciding each move together. The young American alone on the other. Music rising from the stage below, the singers unaware of the small war in the box above them. A board on the table between the players. And the pieces waiting, about to be set out on their squares. And there in that box, with the music still playing below, the pieces are set out again. White begins, and the king's pawn steps out to e4. The oldest greeting in chess: take the center, open a road for the bishop, and let the pieces breathe. Black answers in the same spirit, the pawn coming to e5. Now the two pawns stand chest to chest in the middle, neither able to pass the other. This is the soundest reply Black has, a mirror holding an equal share of the center. White brings the knight out to f3. And already it leans on something. The knight eyes the pawn on e5, asking a quiet question. Develop a piece and make a threat in the same breath. There is nothing better on the board. Black chooses to defend with a modest pawn move, d7 to d6. The pawn on d6 now guards e5, propping it up from the side. It is solid, but it is also cramped. That little pawn locks in the dark bishop behind it and takes away the knight's best square. This is an old, careful way to play, safe and a touch passive. Black is content to hold, not to strike. White strikes at the center now, the second pawn coming to d4. A third pawn thrown forward. It attacks e5 and dares Black to sort out the tension. This is the sharpest, most testing move here. White is prying the position open, and open lines favor the side that is ready. See it plainly. White's pawns reach across the middle at e4 and d4, a broad front. The knight sits on f3, the light bishop and queen still at home, the king not yet castled but soon. Black holds the pawn chain at e5 and d6, pieces still mostly sleeping on the back rank. Now Black reaches out with the light bishop, from c8 all the way to g4. The bishop lands on g4 and pins the knight on f3 against the white queen behind it. A natural idea. Tie down the knight, lean on the pinned defender of the center. But a colder modern eye is uneasy here. The bishop has left its own home ranks thin, and Black is not yet developed enough to be making contact. White does not flinch. The pawn on d4 takes on e5. a capture in the center and a small trap laid inside it. Because the pawn that guarded e5, the one on d6, was the same pawn holding everything together. If black recaptures on e5 with the pawn, white has enk c5, winning a piece off the pin. So black must first settle the knight. Black takes the knight, the bishop on g4 capturing on f3. It removes the pinned knight before it can slip away, and it doubles white's pawns if the queen looks the other way. But it also hands white the two bishops and opens the white queen's road. White recaptures, the queen swinging out to f3. The best move, and a happy one. The queen takes the bishop and lands on a fine open diagonal, staring toward f7. Already white has two pieces in play and a queen aimed at the sorest square in black's camp. Black has almost nothing out. Now black recaptures the pawn, d6 taking on e5. This is correct, the best try. It wins back the pawn and keeps the material even. But look at what the pawn had to leave behind to do it. That pawn was the door in front of black's king. With it gone from d6, the long light diagonal is cracking open. And the square f7, guarded only by the black king, is now the target of everything white wants to build. See the whole board. White's queen glares from f3 down toward f7. White's light bishop is still home on f1, but its diagonal to c4 and beyond is clear and inviting. Black has a single lonely pawn on e5, a king uncastled on e8, and a back rank still crowded with sleeping pieces. White develops the bishop with menace, out to c4. The bishop settles on c4 and joins the queen, both of them now pointed straight at f7. Two attackers on one tender square and only the king to answer for it. The pressure has become real. Black hurries a piece toward the fire, the knight coming to f6. The knight on f6 guards against the worst tricks and finally puts a defender in the way. It blocks the queen's line to a nasty check and starts to bring black to life. But it also steps between the queen and f7 only for now, and white is not done stacking pressure. White presses again, the queen shifting from f3 to b3. The best move on the board. The queen abandons nothing and gains everything. From b3 the queen keeps its aim at f7 along the new diagonal, arm in arm with the bishop on c4. Two heavy attackers back on f7, and this time no knight can block both roads. And the queen on b3 now also stares at the pawn on b7, far across the board undefended. So, black is being asked two questions at once. Save f7 and save b7, and there is barely time for one. There was a harder, colder defense here, giving back the b7 pawn to blunt the attack on f7 and simply survive. It would have been ugly, a pawn down and joyless, but black would still be breathing. Black finds the one move that guards both, the queen stepping up to e7. This is the best defense. The queen on e7 now shields f7 a second time, and it will cover b7 if needed too. It is resourceful. It holds the line. But it is a joyless square for a queen, jammed in front of its own bishop, blocking its own army. Black is now defending, only defending, with the king still stuck in the center on e8. White could grab the pawn on b7 right now, but that lets the queen off the hook and trades the attack for a morsel. Morphy is not hunting a pawn, he is hunting the king, so he keeps every piece pointed inward. White brings the last knight into the game, out to c3. A quiet, developing move, and a generous one. It leaves the pawn on b7 hanging, offered up. The knight on c3 heads for d5, where it would land like a fist beside the black queen and the weak square. This is the whole method laid bare. Every piece in, nothing wasted, the win named as the king, not the pawn. See where things stand now. White has knight on c3, knight gone, bishop on c4, queen on b3, all facing black's cramped half. White's king still sits on e1, but every white piece is doing work aimed at the same corner. Black has the knight on f6, the queen boxed on e7, the king marooned on e8, and a whole flank not yet moved. The bishop on f8 and the rook on h8 have never taken a breath. Black declines the offered pawn. Taking b7 with the queen would drag it far from the king into a storm. Instead, black shores up the center, the pawn coming to c6. This is the best move, and a sensible one. The pawn on c6 slams the door on d5, denying white's knight that dream square. It also gives the boxed queen a small escape, a path to c7 if the pressure grows. But every one of these moves is a wall, never a spear. Black builds fences while white gathers force. And the pawn on c6 has quietly loosened one more square near the king, the way a patched wall thins somewhere else. White has developed everything, given up a pawn without a thought, and waits with all guns leveled at f7 and the frozen king. So the position is set, taut as a held breath, and it is white to move. White reaches for the last quiet piece, the bishop still sitting at home on c1, and slides it up to g5. It settles behind the black knight on f6 and looks straight through it. For down that diagonal past the knight sits the black queen on e7. The knight is pinned. It cannot move without bearing its own queen to the bishop. So one black defender is quietly frozen in place, and white has not spent a thing to do it. This is the best move on the board. Modern analysis agrees. Every white piece now leans toward the black king. Black needs air and reaches for the one piece that can chase something away. The pawn in front of the queenside knight pushes 2 squares to b5. It jabs at the white bishop on c4, the bishop that has been staring at f7 all game. Move the bishop, black is saying, and let me finally breathe. White does not move the bishop. White takes the pawn. The knight leaps from c3 and captures on b5. A knight offered for a single pawn. To an eye that counts material, this looks like a gift. But count instead who is ready to fight. White has 4 pieces in the attack, and black has almost nothing developed. This is still the best move. The sacrifice is the whole point. It tears open the road to the king. Black takes the knight. The c6 pawn captures on b5. And now that pawn stands alone on b5, having eaten the knight. But look what it left behind. The long light diagonal, from b5 up to the black king on e8, is suddenly open. White's bishop steps into it. It captures on b5, and it gives check. The black king, still sitting on e8, is struck along that pale diagonal. This too is the best move. Every capture here is forced, precise, one road only. Black must block. The knight from b8 comes to d7 and steps in front of the king. It is the only good way to meet the check, and it is a bitter one. That knight on d7 is now pinned against its own king. It stands there, unable to move. And the knight on f6 is still pinned against the queen. 2 black knights, both nailed down. Let the whole board settle in their mind for a moment. The black king sits on e8, hemmed in. Beside it the queen on e7, the bishop still home on f8. In front of the king, that pinned knight on d7. Behind, the rooks on a8 and h8, both asleep. White has the bishop on b5, the bishop on g5, the queen on b3, all pointing inward. Only the white king and one rook are not yet in the fight, so white brings them. White castles long to the queenside. The king slides to c1, and the rook swings over to d1. The rook lands on d1 facing straight up the open d file, and at the far end of that file sits the pinned knight on d7. In one move, white tucks the king safe and loads the last gun. This is the best move. The machine finds nothing better. Black feels the file open beneath that knight and hurries a defender to it. The rook comes from a8 to d8, sliding behind its own knight. Now, the knight on d7 is guarded 3 times over, by the rook behind it, by the queen, by the king. It feels defended. It is about to be proven otherwise. White's rook rises up the file and captures on d7. A rook thrown against the knot of defenders, the second sacrifice in the space of a few moves, peels away the first layer. Modern analysis calls it best. The attack must keep taking, or it dies. Black recaptures. The rook on d8 takes back on d7. So a black rook now stands on d7, guarding the same square its knight held, and it too is pinned to the king behind it. White simply brings the other rook. From h1 it slides to d1. The fresh rook takes the open file again and stares once more down at the pinned piece on d7. The pressure has not eased at all. One defender was traded off, and the file reopened behind it. Black looks for relief and offers to trade the queens off. The black queen steps from e7 to e6. It leaves the pin on the back rank and reaches out, hoping white will trade and let the storm blow over. But white has no interest in trading queens. White has a mating net and only needs to close it. See the board once more before the end comes. Black king on e8. In front of it, the pinned rook on d7. The bishop still on f8, the rook still on h8, the knight still on f6. White's rook grips d1, the bishop holds b5, the bishop holds g5, and the queen waits on b3. Everything white owns is aimed at one cramped king. Now it fires. The bishop on b5 takes on d7, and it is check. It takes the pinned rook and strikes the king along the diagonal at the same time. Black has one reply. The knight on f6 captures on d7. It comes back to block the check and to guard the back rank. The last defender, dragged into place. And now the move this game is remembered for. The white queen all the way back on b3 lifts and flies to b8. The greatest piece on the board laid down one square from the enemy rook, asking to be taken. Only one piece can take her. The knight on d7, the rook in the corner is shut in behind its own bishop on f8. And that is the whole point of it. That knight is the one thing standing in the white rook's way, down the d-file. This is the best move, and it is the only path to mate, a queen given so that a knight must leave its post. Had black some quiet square to run to, the queen would be a blunder. There is none. The gift must be accepted. The knight takes on b8. It steps off d7 to swallow the queen, and in stepping off, it clears the one square standing between the white rook and the back rank. The knight that recaptured now sits on b8 in the corner. The king on e8 has no square left. White's rook is still waiting on d1, on the open file, and every escape has just been sealed. The rook slides up the whole board and comes to rest on d8. Rook to d8, checkmate. The king on e8 is struck along the back rank. The bishop on f8 blocks nothing. The knight sulks in the corner. The king cannot take it. The bishop on g5 has guarded d8 from across the board this whole time. No capture, no block, no step aside. Here is the strange arithmetic of it all. On the losing side, there still stands a queen's worth of force, a knight, a bishop, both rooks gone or idle, while white finishes with almost nothing but the two pieces that gave the mate. White has checkmated with less on the board and won. Black is mated in the center on the 17th move, and that is checkmate. The game is over. The king has nowhere to go and nobody left to put in the way. And that is the last move anybody needed to make. For a moment, in that box, with the music still going on below, nobody says anything at all. The man who would sit across from him next was not a duke sharing pieces with a count. His name was Adolf Anderssen, a mathematics teacher from Breslau who taught boys their sums by day, and who was, by common agreement, the strongest chess player in all of Europe. 7 years earlier, in 1851, the great players had gathered in London for a tournament. Anderssen won it. He came home the finest of them all. So when the young American crossed the ocean, this was the meeting everyone waited for. The prodigy from New Orleans and the master from Breslau. Whatever else Morphy had done, this was the game that would settle the question. If you beat Anderssen, there was no one left above you. And since this is not a thriller, let me tell you now how it ended. They played 11 games. Morphy won 7 of them. Anderssen won 2. 2 more were drawn. 7-2 with 2 draws. It was not close. The strongest player in Europe was beaten, plainly, by a man of 21. And here is the part that stays with me. Anderssen did not reach for a reason afterward. He wrote a letter to an old friend, von der Lasse, about the defeat. He said he had been out of practice. That much was true. But he would not let it stand as an excuse. He allowed simply that Morphy was the stronger player and had beaten him fairly. He went further than that. He said he had never known a player like him. Above every master he could name. Above even La Bourdonnais, the great one of the generation before. From the man who had held the crown, that was the whole verdict, freely given. Now, come down from all of that to the room where it was actually played. Paris, the last week of December, 1858. The cold end of the year, the city dark by late afternoon. And here is a thing the accounts of that winter tell us. Morphy was not well. He had come down in Paris with a complaint of the stomach. The doctors treated him in the fashion of their time. With leeches, he was bled a great deal. Picture that for a moment. Weak, drained of blood, told to rest. And across the city, the strongest player in Europe, waiting. He could have asked to postpone. No one would have thought less of him. He played the match anyway. Pale, unsteady, he came to the board and he sat down. No music this time, no opera box, no nobleman sharing the pieces. Just 2 men and a board between them, and the quiet of a Paris December. One the schoolteacher who had beaten the world. The other a sick young man who had crossed an ocean to find out how good he was. And on one of those December evenings he came to the room and took his chair. Whatever the week had done to him, he was there. And in that same Paris December, with the sick room barely a day behind him, he sits down opposite Anderssen for the 9th time, and the pieces are set out once more. White begins in the center. The king's pawn goes to e4, and the board opens with that one square claimed. Black answers on the wing. A pawn slides to c5. The Sicilian, a refusal to mirror. Black is saying, I will not meet you head-on. I will fight for the center from the side. White does not wait. A second pawn strides to d4, offering it freely in the middle. Now the tension. That d4 pawn stands beside a black pawn that would love to take it. And black obliges. The c5 pawn captures on d4, carrying itself into the heart of the board. This is the bargain of the open Sicilian. Black trades a wing pawn for a center pawn, and gains an open file to work with later. White will not rush to win it back. The knight from g1 comes to f3, developing and eyeing that stray pawn on d4. One piece out, one square of pressure. The pawn on d4 now feels a shadow fall over it. Black develops in kind. The queen's knight steps from b8 to c6, guarding, reaching toward the center. Both sides are doing the quiet, correct thing. Knights out, eyes on the middle, nothing hurried yet. Now white collects the pawn. The f3 knight captures on d4, planting itself on a fine central square. See where that knight sits. On d4, it is a spider in the middle of the web, touching c6, e6, f5, b5, all at once. The material is even again, but white's pieces are the livelier ones, and that is the whole point of the opening. Black builds a small, solid wall. A pawn goes to e6, taking away the d5 and f5 squares from white's pieces. It is a modest move, a good one, the beginning of a compact little house for the black king to hide in. But white has a needle. The knight leaves d4 and jumps to b5, and suddenly it is staring at a tender spot. From b5 that knight eyes c7, the square right beside the black king's home, where a fork would win a rook. So black must answer the threat. A pawn steps to d6, taking the c7 escape and shoring up the dark squares. This is the sound thing to do. The pawn on d6 covers c5 and e5, and quietly tells the knight it has no landing. Let the whole board settle in the mind for a moment. White's knight juts out on b5. Its partner still waits at home on b1. Black has knights, if you like, one on c6, the king's knight still on g8, and a chain of little pawns on d6 and e6. Both kings are still in the center, uncastled, watching. Nothing has been struck yet, but white's pieces lean forward, and black's crouch. White reaches for the dark squares. The bishop comes out from c1 to f4, aiming straight at that pawn on d6. The bishop on f4 and the knight on b5 now both press on d6, two attackers leaning on one point. A colder, modern eye would not have brought the bishop out here at all. It would have pushed a pawn to c4, a slow move, and a permanent one. Black's whole hope in a structure like this is the freeing push of the d-pawn to d5. A pawn standing on c4 says, "Not ever." White is asking a hard question: defend d6 again, or push past the pressure entirely? Black chooses to push. The pawn advances from e6 to e5, striking at the f4 bishop and gaining space with tempo. This is the strong reply. By attacking the bishop, black wins time, and the pawn on e5 now guards d6 from behind. The bishop must move. It slides back one square, from f4 to e3, out of the pawn's reach but still on the long dark road. This retreat is the clean one. On e3 the bishop keeps its eye on the queenside and waits for the position to open. Notice what black's pawns have done though. Pushing to e5 left a hole behind. The d5 square, pale and unguarded by any pawn. That pale square on d5 will matter. A white piece that lands there could not be chased away by a pawn, ever. And here comes the first true drift from the path. Black plays a pawn to f5, throwing it forward on the king side. It looks aggressive, a pawn storming toward white's half of the board, and it is the move modern analysis gently frowns at. The quieter, better road was simply the knight to f6 developing, covering that pale d5 hole, getting the king towards safety. Instead, the king's knight still sleeps on g8, and the king still sits in the center while pawns go hunting. Every pawn that marches forward is a pawn that will not come back to guard the king. That is the hidden cost here. White develops toward the weakness. The knight from b1 comes to c3, joining the game and pointing at that soft d5 square. Both white knights could have gone to c3, the one still at home on b1 and the one jutting out on b5. The record has to say which, and it says the knight from b1. The outpost on b5 stays exactly where it is. Now count the eyes on d5. The c3 knight, and behind the coming pieces, a whole plan builds toward that one pale hole. This is the best square for the knight, and the most patient kind of move. It threatens nothing loud, and improves everything. There was something louder available. The e4 pawn could simply have taken the pawn on f5. But then the bishop on c8 takes back on f5, and the piece black's own pawn was standing in front of is suddenly out and working. Black keeps rolling the pawn. It goes on from f5 to f4, kicking at the bishop on e3, gaining ground on the king side. So the bishop is attacked again, and again black wins a little time. The pawn on f4 says, "Move or be taken." But look what this second push does. The f4 pawn has now walked 2 squares past the black king's shelter, and it can never guard home again. And there is a second cost, quieter than the first. The pawn that used to stand on f7 was sitting on 2 roads at once. It blocked the pale diagonal climbing from a2 up to g8, and it blocked the light road running from h5 down through g6 to e8. Both of those roads are open now, and before this game ends, white will send a bishop down one and the queen down the other. The king side, where black must Sunday castle, is turning into open ground. Pawns ahead, pieces behind, the king still in the middle. White's whole army leans on the light squares in the center now, patient and coiled, while black's pawns have gone adventuring on the wing. White's knight lifts from c3 and comes to rest on d5, right in the middle of the board. It steps clean past the little quarrel on the king side, as if that fight were somebody else's. Because from d5, this knight is looking at the black king's front porch, the squares c7, e7, f6, and nothing can ever chase it off. The only two that could have attacked d5 were the c-pawn, traded off on the second move of the game, and the e-pawn, which has marched past it and can never come back. And here is the thing worth holding in mind. White's bishop still stands on e3, and black's pawn on f4 is staring right at it, ready to take it. White has just decided not to care. The threat is quiet but heavy. The knight wants to reach c7, where it would check the king and hit the corner rook at the same time. So black takes the offered gift. The pawn on f4 captures on e3. White's dark bishop is gone, and a black pawn now sits on e3, close to white's own king. A colder modern eye agrees this was black's best. The bishop was simply free. But white wanted it taken. That capture cost black a move, and a move is exactly what white was buying. Now the second knight springs. From b5 it jumps to c7, and it lands with check. One knight, 2 targets. It checks the king on e8, and it attacks the rook asleep in the corner on a8. The king has to answer the check first, and while it does, the rook cannot be saved. Black's king steps up to f7 out of the check and leaves the corner rook behind. The king is off its back rank now, standing in the open air of the f-file, with nothing much in front of it. White brings the queen out from d1 to f3, and again, check. Straight up the f-file, the queen looks the king in the eye on f7. Here the road forks, and white takes the sharper turn. A colder, modern eye would have paused to simply take the rook. The knight was sitting on c7, one hop from a8 and a free piece. Grab the rook, bank the material, win slowly. That was the calm road. There was a plainer road still, the f2 pawn simply taking back on e3, and that black thorn beside white's own king quietly gone. White chose the loud one instead. Keep checking, keep the king running, and never let it breathe. Black plugs the check. The knight from g8 drops back to f6, standing in the doorway between the queen and the king. Let the whole board settle in your mind for a moment. Black's king sits on f7, out in the middle, its shelter mostly gone. White has a knight planted on d5 and a knight on c7, both deep in black's half, both untouched. The white queen glares up the f-file from f3. The black knight on f6 is the one flimsy shutter holding that door closed. White's king still stands at home on e1, and beside it a black pawn on e3, a small thorn for later. Into that picture, white slides the light bishop out to c4. Onto the long pale diagonal it goes, pointing straight through the center at f7 at the king. For the moment the knight on d5 stands in the bishop's way. Hold that thought. It matters very soon. And notice what is guarding f7 behind that diagonal. Nothing is. The king is standing on the square, and a king cannot defend the ground under its own feet. Black finally hits back. The knight on c6 leaps in to d4, and it attacks the white queen on f3. A real punch. Move the queen, Black hopes, and the storm loses its thunder. White does not move the queen. The knight on d5 captures on f6, taking the little shutter that guarded the king. And watch what leaving d5 uncovers. The bishop on c4, no longer blocked, now stares clean down the diagonal to f7. It is check. The knight took a piece with one hand and opened a line of fire with the other. Black throws a body in the way. The pawn steps from d6 to d5, closing the diagonal, blocking the bishop's check. White just takes it. The bishop captures on d5, and the check comes straight back on that same pale road to f7. Now the king must move, and this is the moment the whole game turns on. See where the king can go. Back to e7, tucking toward the safety of home, or forward out into the open to g6. On e7, it would stand beside its own queen and its own bishop, with the g7 pawn still covering f6. On g6, it stands with two of its own pawns behind it, and the whole of white's army in front. Black's king walks forward into the light up to g6. This is the step that loses. A colder, modern eye wanted e7, retreat, cover the king, and black might yet have held the extra pieces. On g6, the king has no roof and no friends. It has wandered into the middle of white's fire. And white is waiting. The queen swings across from f3 to h5. Check. She stands right beside the king now on h5, close enough to touch. The king has exactly one square that is not fire. It reaches out and takes the knight on f6, the only door left open. So the black king now stands on f6, deep in white's half of the board, naked in the open. Feel how strange this is. Black is a bishop to the good, with a queen and two rooks still sitting quietly at home. And none of it is near the king. The king is out here alone, and white has the queen and the bishop breathing on it. Now white takes a slow, patient breath in the middle of the storm. The pawn on f2 captures that black pawn on e3, the little thorn beside white's own king, quietly removed. And it does more than tidy up. Taking on e3 opens the f-file, and the f-file points straight at the king on f6. One more line of attack, laid down as gently as setting a stone in place. Black lashes out with the last free piece. The knight on d4 grabs the pawn on c2, and it comes with check. It forks as it lands, the king on e1, and the rook in the corner on a1, both in the fork at once. For a heartbeat, it looks like black is the one attacking. White does not blink, and white does not defend the corner. The king simply steps aside from e1 to e2. Off the check, out of the fork, and quietly, one step closer to the front, where the real business is. So hold the board as it stands. Black's king is stranded on f6 in the open, hunted. White's queen sits on h5, the bishop on d5, both trained on that king. White's own king stands calmly on e2. Black's knight sits on c2, about to snap up the corner rook, a world away from the danger. Black is still the bishop to the good, and the queen and both rooks have never left the back rank. And it is black to move, with a king that has nowhere left to hide. And that is the last move anybody writes down. There is no checkmate on this board. The position is reached and looked at, and the record stops there. Underneath the moves, the result is written: a win for white. The strongest player in Europe had been beaten in Europe. By the spring, the banquets had begun. When the last piece was still, the board was the smallest thing in the room. Because by then, all of Europe had decided what he was. Not a promising young man from New Orleans, something larger. In Paris, they held a farewell banquet for him on the 4th of April, 1859. There was a marble bust of him, carved by a sculptor named Eugene Lecaine. And a man named Saint-Amand rose and set a laurel wreath upon its brow. He named him the first chess player in the whole world. Picture it, the stone likeness of a young man, crowned in leaves while the living one looks on. That spring, in London, they gathered again and said the same thing. Champion of the chess world. And here is the quiet truth of it. The phrase was already loose in the world. An American paper had printed it back in October of 1858. Champion of the world. A chess magazine repeated it that June, reporting a speaker at a dinner. And a New York weekly welcomed him home in July of 1859 in the same words. There was no title to award him, so the world simply started calling him one. And the name travelled further than any banquet. One night in Paris, after the day's play was finished, Morphy was sitting in his room with his travelling companion. A very large stranger appeared in the doorway and announced himself without any ceremony at all. "I am Prince Galitzin. I wish to see Mr. Morphy." Morphy was sunk down in an armchair. He looked up and said, "I am he." The prince said, "It is not possible. You are too young." Then he sat down beside him and explained where he had first heard the name. On the frontiers of Siberia. Somebody in his party had been carrying a chess paper printed in Berlin, and ever since, he said, he had wanted to meet the man in it. He told Morphy he must come to St. Petersburg, that the chess club inside the Imperial Palace would receive him with enthusiasm. The companion who wrote all this down added one dry line at the end of it. He did not hear Morphy promise to go. But the ovations were not the whole of that spring. It is worth staying with the exception. In London, he played 5 masters at once, moving from board to board. He won 2 of the games. He drew 2. And one he lost to a player named Thomas Wilson Barnes. It is a small thing and easy to leave out. A season made only of banquets would be a shape to distrust. He could be beaten. Once, at a table of 5. It happened. Of the 2 he drew, one was against Lowenthal, the same man who had come to New Orleans and lost to a boy of 12. There is another moment from those months that tells you more than any Wreath. He had beaten Howitz at the Café de la Régence, the great chess room of Paris. And then he did something strange. He offered Howitz a new match, but this time at odds. A pawn and a move handed to his opponent before a piece had stirred. He even offered to find the money to back the other man, to fund the person trying to beat him. The offer was declined. And so he made a declaration there in Paris that he would play no more formal matches with anyone, not one, without giving at least those odds. A pawn and a move to the whole of the rest of the world. It was not arrogance, exactly. It was closer to a man closing a door he no longer needed open. Whether he truly kept to that for the rest of his life is a harder question. The familiar later story, a final challenge, pawn and move to any player alive, the sources disagree on. It can be traced only as far back as one much later pamphlet, and a researcher who went looking for anything earlier found nothing. So we can say this with confidence. He made the declaration in Paris. How faithfully he lived by it afterward, we leave where the record leaves it uncertain. Then he sailed home, and America had been waiting. The accolades did not pause. If anything, they grew louder on his own shore. At the University of the City of New York, in late May of 1859, they honored him. The man who spoke was John Van Buren, the son of a president. And he called him chess champion of the world. In Boston, they set a banquet for him at the Revere House. There, by report, the poet and physician Oliver Wendell Holmes raised a glass to him in the very same words. By report, the fullest account we can read of that night prints another man's speech and not the toast. So we pass it on gently as it comes down to us. The country did the rest in the way countries do. There was a hat named after him, a cigar, and a baseball club over in Brooklyn that took his name. Think of that. Your name on a cigar, on a hat, on a team of men playing ball. A young lawyer from New Orleans turned into a household word. And it is at exactly this height that he said the thing worth remembering. At the New York dinner, with the room full of his admirers, he rose to speak. And he told them that chess never has been, and never can be, anything but a recreation. That it should not be indulged in to the detriment of more serious pursuits. That it ought to be kept in the background, restrained within its proper province. Say that slowly. The finest player alive, at his own coronation, telling the room the game does not matter very much. It reads strangely now, knowing what came after. At the time, it surprised no one at all. To them, it was simply a gentleman being a gentleman. Chess was a diversion. The law was a life. He seems truly to have meant it. There was one piece of chess work he did agree to. A newspaper, the New York Ledger, engaged him to write a chess column. For $3,000, a remarkable sum, to set his name over a page. It began around August of 1859. And notice what he chose to write about. not his own games, not the opera box, not the men he had just swept aside. He annotated old games, the matches of La Bourdonnais and MacDonald, battles fought 25 years before he ever picked up the pen. The champion of the age, turning his attention to the dead. And by the accounts that survive, he was idle about even that. Years later, a friend named Fuller wrote, remembering how little the work seemed to hold him. The column ran a while, and then it stopped. August of 1860. 1 year of writing, mostly about someone else's chess, and that was the end of it. So here he stands at the very top. A wreath on his marble brow in Paris, his name in the mouths of a president's son and a poet. The phrase champion of the world following him across an ocean and back. And the man himself saying the game is only a game and letting the last of his chess work quietly lapse. He had beaten everyone worth beating. He had said so, in his way, by offering them all a pawn. The honours had all been given, the bust was carved, the column was closed. And there was now almost nothing left for him to do. He crossed back over the ocean, the most famous chess player alive. He was young. He had beaten everyone who would sit down across from him. And then, over the space of only a couple of years, quietly, he stopped. There was no farewell game. No announcement, no last great board to remember it by. He simply withdrew from serious play almost entirely. And he did not go back to it. Because the truth is that chess had never been the life he meant to have. He was going to be a lawyer. That was the plan he had carried with him to Europe and carried home again. The chess was the thing the world wanted from him. The law was the thing he wanted for himself. In 1861, the country he had come home to began to break apart. The Civil War had begun. His brother, Edward, served the Confederacy. And Morphy himself had some connection to the staff of General Beauregard. Around the time of that first great battle near Manassas. What exactly he did there, the records will not quite agree on. One man who remembered him placed him as an officer on the staff. Other accounts say Beauregard thought him unsuited to it. So we will leave it where the sources leave it. Near the war, but never clearly inside it. In these years he travelled more than he ever settled. To Havana in 1862. And to Havana again in 1864. There he played the champion of Cuba, a man named Golmayo. And he gave Golmayo the odds of a night. A whole piece, handed across the board before a single move was made. It was the old generosity of the touring master. Even now, he could still afford to give a piece away. And to Paris in 1863, the city that had once risen to its feet for him. He came back to it a quieter man than the one it had cheered. But the ordinary life he wanted would not take hold. 3 separate times he tried to open a law practice in New Orleans. And 3 separate times it came to nothing. The record does not tell us exactly why. Only that it failed. And failed again. And failed a 3rd time. By 1875, the people closest to him had grown worried enough to act. His family considered having him committed to a place called the Louisiana Retreat. It was a heavy step to weigh. A door that does not always open again. And here is the part that the careless tellings leave out. Morphy objected. He did not rage, and he did not fall apart. he argued his own case. Calmly, and point by point, he made the argument for his own soundness. And he made it so clearly, so completely, that there was simply no answering it. His mother listened to the whole of it, and she concluded that his condition did not call for anything so extreme. The committal was set aside. We know this from a letter written by Charles Morian, his friend since boyhood, his friend for the whole of his life. The man who was about to be declared unable to reason had reasoned his own way out of the room. What was truly the matter with him in those years is harder to say than the old story pretends. 2 letters survive from the 1870s from men who knew of him. One from early in that decade, one from the very end of it. They describe a man grown withdrawn and wary of the people around him. But these are impressions, carried secondhand, not the record of any physician who examined him. And here the sources genuinely part ways. So let me say plainly how. Some later writers built whole diagnoses on top of those few impressions. And a careful modern biography calls those diagnoses unreliable and sets them aside. That these things were said of him, that we can document, that they were true of him, no one now can honestly claim to know. In 1883, a visitor came to New Orleans, hoping to see him. Wilhelm Steinitz. By then the strongest player in the world, the first man the world would call its champion. He travelled a long way on the chance of meeting Morphy. The two of them, a generation apart, in the same city at last. Whether the two of them ever truly sat down together, the record does not tell. It gives us only the fact of the journey and the hope behind it. And then we come to the last of it. The 10th of July in 1884, it was high summer in New Orleans. The middle of the day was heavy with heat. He had been out walking, a long walk in that midday sun. He came home, and he stepped into a cold bath to cool himself. And there in the water he was found. He was 47 years old. The cause they set down at the time was congestion of the brain. Brought on, they said, by cold water meeting a body still warm from the sun. Looking back, a modern reading calls it, most likely a stroke. Paul Morphy died in the city where he had been born. In the middle of an ordinary summer afternoon. The house quiet around him, and the heat still standing over the streets outside. So the pieces come to rest, and the question that outlives the game begins. What was he, this man who moved through the board like water? Start with the man who lost to him, because he saw it closest. Anderssen, beaten across the table, did not sulk about it. He said Morphy treated chess with the earnestness and the conscientiousness of an artist. An artist, not a gambler, not a showman, someone answerable to the thing itself. And he said something sharper still, about playing against him. That once you had made a single bad move against Morphy, you might as well resign. Because he would not let the mistake heal. He would build on it patiently until it was the whole game. Then the line people still repeat, and Anderssen said it to Morphy's own face, that Morphy won his games in 17 moves, and that he, Anderssen, won his in 70. The same result reached twice, one by force, one by labor. It is about the most generous thing a beaten champion has ever said of the man who beat him. The players who came after tried to name what Anderssen was pointing at. Kasparov calls him the forefather of modern chess. Not the strongest who ever lived, the first. The first to understand, as a system, the things that now sound obvious. Bring your pieces out quickly. Hold the center. Put your rooks where the lines are open. Everyone plays that way now. He played that way when almost no one else did. That is what you were watching, move by move, in the game just told. Not luck, a method arriving about 100 years before it was meant to. Fischer, who was not easy to impress, put him among the 10 greatest ever to play. And went further still, in a piece he wrote years afterward. He called Morphy perhaps the most accurate player who ever lived. Accurate, a cold word from a cold judge, and maybe the highest one he had. Not the most beautiful, not the most daring, the one who was simply right the most often. So far this is all praise, and praise alone makes a statue, not a man. It is worth hearing the voice that pushed back. Reuben Fine, a great player and a clear-eyed writer, did exactly that. He argued against the Morphy myth, the version in which the man could do no wrong. He thought the legend had grown taller than the record could hold up. And yet even Fine, doing the deflating himself, stopped at a line he would not cross. He still called Morphy one of the giants of the game's history. That is the honest shape of it. Trim the myth all you like. When the trimming is done, a giant is still standing there. Two things, though, get repeated about him as settled fact, and neither one is settled. The first is his saddest name, the pride and sorrow of chess. It is a beautiful phrase, and it is usually quoted as though everyone knows who first said it. But no one quite does. Recent research points to a man named Walter Cookspens. And that same research admits plainly that the attribution is unclear. So the sources disagree, and here is how. The phrase travels the world as if its author were known, while the people who study it say he is not. The second, unsettled thing is the biggest word attached to his name. Champion of the world. In 1858, there was no such title to hold. No match anointed a world champion. No crown you could be handed and later lose. What there were rooms full of admirers. In Paris, and then home in New York, they rose at banquets and hailed him champion of the chess world. And here too, the sources disagree, and it is worth being exact about how. One side says the honor was real, because a whole world of chess said so out loud. The other says acclamation is not a title. A title is a thing you can lose. Applause is only a thing you can be given. That very phrase, champion of the chess world, was a loose one in those years. It was handed round in those years by whoever happened to be cheering, and taken back just as easily. The same words had been used, more than 10 years earlier, of the Englishman who never did sit down against him. So the phrase was already second-hand by the time it landed on Morphy. So when you hear Morphy called world champion, know that it is a name the future gave him. Looking back, fitting him into a line of champions that did not yet exist when he played. None of this makes the games any smaller. The moves are the record. They happened, in the order you heard them, and anyone can still check them. It is only the words around the man that stay unfinished. You have heard 3 of his games tonight, from the first move to the last, with nothing left out. Whatever the words turn out to be worth, that part of it is not in dispute. And so he leaves us the way he found the board, with a question cleanly posed. Was he the greatest natural gift the game had yet produced? Or was he a man the game simply used up, left with nothing more to prove and nothing to do once he had proved it. That is a life from a room in New Orleans to a room in New Orleans. There's nothing left to picture now. Let the pieces grow still. And slowly, gently let the whole board begin to fade, the green squares and the cream, softening and dimming, until there is only the dark and the quiet and your own slow breathing. You did beautifully. Rest now. Good night.